The morning sun stretched across the endless plains, casting a soft golden glow over the tall grasses that swayed gently in the wind. It was the kind of morning that seemed quiet and peaceful, but for those who lived on these lands, peace was often fragile. The Komanche people had lived here for generations, moving with the seasons, hunting, gathering, and caring for their families. Their lives were shaped by nature, the land, and the traditions passed down from parents to children. Among them was a young girl, no older than 13, with bright eyes that reflected both curiosity and the innocence of youth. She lived with her mother, father, and 2 younger siblings in a small encampment nestled near the edge of a shallow creek. Her mornings often began before the sun fully rose. She would help her mother prepare the fire, gather water, and take care of her little brother and sister. Despite the hard work, she loved the quiet moments when she could sit by the water, watch the birds, and listen to the whispers of the wind through the grasses. Life was simple but full of small joys. She had friends in the encampment and loved to explore the surrounding hills, always careful to return before dark. Her father taught her about the land, the paths of the animals, the plants that could heal, and the stories of their people. She was curious about everything, eager to learn and understand the world around her. That day, the girl had been sent to gather some herbs near the creek. She moved carefully, stepping lightly over the uneven ground, her small hands brushing the leaves as she went. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of wildflowers and the faint aroma of damp earth. She was humming a little tune her mother had taught her when she suddenly noticed movement in the distance. A man was walking toward the creek, and he was not like anyone she had seen before. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, and his clothes were dusty from travel. His boots made deep impressions in the soft earth, and he carried a lasso coiled over his shoulder. The girl stopped and watched him cautiously. She had been told by her parents to be careful of strangers, especially men who were alone. Yet, there was something about him that seemed different. He did not rush, and his eyes seemed to look at the world with a mixture of weariness and curiosity. She tilted her head, trying to understand who he was and why he was here. The man noticed her as well. His eyes softened when he saw her standing there, small and fragile against the vastness of the plains. He lifted his hand slightly in greeting, and after a moment, she did the same, unsure but curious. "Hello," he said, his voice low and calm. "I mean no harm. I'm just passing through." The girl hesitated but then nodded. "Are you lost?" she asked. Her voice was soft but firm. She had learned to speak carefully to strangers, balancing politeness with caution. "I suppose I am," he replied. "I was looking for my cattle, but I think I may have taken the wrong path. The land here is vast." He smiled faintly, and there was a sadness in his eyes that made the girl feel a strange mix of sympathy and caution. She considered him for a moment. She wanted to help, but also remembered her parents' warning. "I can show you the path back," she offered finally. "It's easy to get lost here." The man nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "Thank you. That would be kind." They began walking together, the girl leading the way through familiar terrain. As they moved, she asked him questions, curious about his life and why he traveled alone. He told her he was a cowboy, someone who looked after cattle and sometimes helped settlers. He spoke carefully, not revealing too much but enough to satisfy her curiosity. She found herself fascinated by his stories of the open plains, the distant towns, and the life of a cowboy, which was so different from her own. The girl noticed that he seemed tired, and his eyes often looked distant, as if he carried a burden he did not want to speak about. She sensed a sadness in him, though she did not understand it fully. In return, he noticed her innocence, her careful ways, and the gentle strength that came from living a life connected to the land. He found himself feeling protective, even though he knew he should not. When they reached the edge of the creek, the girl paused and turned to him. "This is where you will find the path back," she said. The creek twisted into a narrow trail that led to the hills beyond, a route he could follow. He nodded, and for a moment, there was silence between them, the kind of quiet that carries unspoken thoughts. He looked at her, his mind torn between the harsh life he had known and the simple humanity he saw in this girl. In his years as a cowboy, he had often faced danger, hardship, and loneliness. He had seen cruelty and survival in equal measure, but looking at her, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. A pang of regret for all the harshness he had endured and inflicted, and a recognition of innocence in a world that often crushed it. The girl smiled softly. "I hope you find your cattle," she said, "and I hope you have safe travels." Her words were simple, but they carried a kindness and trust that the man could not ignore. He hesitated, struggling with his own thoughts. He had faced temptation and weakness before, but this time, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He knew that any wrong action here would not just be another story of the harsh frontier, it would leave a mark on him, one that could never be erased. For a moment, he thought of taking advantage of the situation, of doing something that could satisfy a fleeting desire, but then he saw her eyes wide, trusting, innocent, and the idea left him immediately. Instead, he lowered his gaze and took a deep breath. "You are very brave," he said quietly, "and wise. I will remember your kindness." The girl nodded, sensing the tension in him, though she did not fully understand it. "Goodbye," she said, turning to walk back toward her encampment. As she left, he watched her disappear among the tall grasses. For the first time in many years, he felt a sharp clarity about who he wanted to be. Even if it was difficult, he realized that the frontier had shaped him in many ways, but it had also given him a choice, the choice to act with honor or to fall into the easy wrongs that many before him had chosen. That morning remained in both of their minds long after it passed. For the girl, it was a small adventure, a moment of curiosity and human connection in her daily life. For the cowboy, it was a pivotal moment, one that would challenge him more deeply than any battle or journey he had faced. The plains stretched endlessly around them, but within the vastness, a simple encounter had planted a seed of conscience, of reflection, and of a struggle between right and wrong. The girl returned to her family, bringing the herbs she had gathered and recounting her brief meeting with the cowboy in a way that emphasized his gentleness and the strangeness of meeting someone from the outside world. Her parents listened carefully, their faces showing a mixture of relief and caution. They reminded her to always be careful with strangers, but also praised her for her thoughtfulness and bravery. Meanwhile, the cowboy continued on his path, watching the trail and thinking about the girl. He felt a mix of admiration and guilt. Though he had not acted wrongly, he realized how close he had come to making a mistake that could have changed both of their lives forever. He knew that from this day forward, he would measure his actions more carefully, aware of the fragile lives and trust he encountered in his journeys. By the end of the day, the plains had grown quiet again, the sun dipping toward the horizon. Shadows stretched across the grasses, and the wind whispered through the hills. The encounter seemed almost dreamlike in its simplicity, yet its impact was profound. Both the girl and the cowboy had been touched by a fleeting moment of humanity, a reminder that even in a harsh and unforgiving world, choices mattered, and the heart could still be moved by innocence, kindness, and trust. As night fell, the girl lay down beside her younger siblings, recounting the day's events quietly in her mind. While the cowboy camped under the stars, staring at the vast sky and feeling the weight of conscience settle into his heart, the plains, endless and unchanging, bore witness to the encounter, silent, patient, and eternal. And somewhere in the quiet between day and night, both the girl and the cowboy understood, in their own ways, that life on the frontier was not just about survival, it was also about the small, defining moments that shaped who they were and who they could become. The days following their encounter passed quietly at the Komanche encampment. The girl continued her chores, gathering water and firewood, helping her mother cook, and caring for her younger siblings. Life went on as it always had, rhythmical and connected to the land. Yet, something had shifted within her. She often thought about the cowboy, wondering about his life, his journey, and the sadness she had glimpsed in his eyes. It was not fear or worry that lingered, but a curiosity, a gentle concern for a man who had seemed lost in the vastness of the plains. For the cowboy, the days were different. He wandered the plains, searching for the cattle he had lost. But his thoughts were never far from the encounter with the girl. The memory of her trusting eyes, the softness of her voice, and her courage in the face of uncertainty remained with him. He had lived a life of hard roads and endless travel. Yet never had he met someone who stirred a reflection so deeply within him. That single moment had awakened a conscience that he had long ignored, buried under years of survival and the rough demands of frontier life. He found himself thinking about what it meant to do right, even when no one was watching. In the past, he had made decisions that benefited himself, sometimes at the expense of others. But the girl's presence had reminded him that even small actions could carry weight, and that innocence, fragile and precious, deserved protection. He realized that life on the plains was more than cattle, travel, and survival. It was about choices, about character, and about the responsibility one had toward others, even strangers. One morning, after several days of wandering, he returned near the creek where he had first met the girl. He walked slowly, taking in the familiar shapes of the hills and the gentle flow of the water. The sunlight sparkled on the surface of the creek, and the grasses swayed as if greeting him. For a moment, he allowed himself to hope that perhaps the girl and her family were well, that the simple life of the encampment continued peacefully. Yet, alongside that hope was an unease, a recognition that the frontier could change anything in a moment. The cowboy decided to stay nearby for a short time, keeping watch from a distance. He did not approach the encampment directly. He wanted to observe without interfering, to ensure that the girl and her family were safe. From behind a small rise in the land, he saw the encampment, smoke curling from the cooking fires, children playing near the water, and women moving about with the quiet purpose of daily life. He felt relief wash over him, yet it was tinged with the realization that he could not undo the past. He remembered his own childhood, a time of warmth and family, but also of loss and hardship. He thought about the lessons he had learned too late, about trust and kindness, and about the mistakes he had made that had left scars he could never erase. Seeing the girl now, safe and unaware of the full weight of the world, he felt a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Gratitude for the chance to witness innocence and life continuing, and sorrow for the moments he had failed to act rightly in his own past. Meanwhile, the girl had sensed something unusual in the days after their meeting. Though she had returned to her family and routines, she noticed a presence nearby. Sometimes, she would catch a glimpse of a figure on the hill, watching but not approaching. She did not feel fear, though she was cautious, but rather a quiet curiosity. There was something different about this man. He did not seem threatening, but he carried a weight that she could not fully understand. In her innocence, she assumed he might be in need of help, or perhaps lost and tired from travel. One afternoon, she decided to leave the encampment for a short walk near the creek, keeping close to the familiar paths her father had shown her. As she moved, she noticed footprints in the soft earth, unfamiliar and large, yet careful and deliberate. She paused, considering what to do, and then saw the cowboy emerging slowly from behind a small ridge. Their eyes met, and she froze for a moment. There was no anger, no hostility, only recognition. The cowboy stopped, raising his hands slightly in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm," he said quietly. "I just wanted to make sure you are safe." The girl nodded, understanding that his intentions were sincere. "We are fine," she replied softly. "My family is well. Why are you here?" He sighed and looked away, staring at the horizon. I wanted to see that you were okay," he admitted. "After the last time we met, I realized how important it is to do right, and I wanted to make sure you were safe." The girl studied him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "You don't have to watch over us," she said. "We can take care of ourselves." "I know," he said, shaking his head, "but I cannot stop thinking about that moment. I know I did not act wrongly toward you, but I felt something I have never felt before. Responsibility, perhaps. Guilt, maybe. And I wanted to make sure that my presence is not harmful in any way." For the first time, the girl noticed a vulnerability in him. A human side, that contrasted sharply with the image of the rough cowboy she had imagined. She realized that he was struggling with his own conscience, with choices he had made before, and with a desire to act rightly in a world that often demanded harshness. Days turned into weeks, and the cowboy continued to watch from a distance, never interfering, always respectful of the family's space. He began to reflect more deeply on his life, on the moments when he had failed to act with care, and on the simple truth that even small actions mattered. He thought about his travels, the people he had met, the loneliness and hardships, and the ways in which he had grown hardened by survival. But now, he realized that hardness was not always necessary, that it could be softened by kindness, by mindfulness, and by conscience. The girl, too, changed in subtle ways. She became more aware of the world beyond her encampment, more cautious, but also more understanding. She recognized that there were people in the world who struggled with their own choices, and that sometimes, even strangers could carry deep lessons. She did not fully understand the complexity of the cowboy's feelings, but she felt the sincerity in his actions, the careful attention, and the respect he showed. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, the cowboy sat alone near the creek. He had spent the day reflecting on his life. Writing in a small journal he kept in his pocket, he recorded his thoughts, the lessons he had learned, and the moments that had changed him. He wrote about the girl, about the importance of conscience, and about the fragile beauty of trust and innocence. Writing brought him a strange sense of relief, a way to confront his emotions without harming anyone. He realized that he was being given a rare opportunity, the chance to witness life and innocence without corrupting it, to learn from it, and to allow it to shape him into a better person. He understood that he could not erase the past, could not undo the mistakes he had made before, but he could choose to act rightly now, to honor the trust and kindness he had seen. The girl, walking back to the encampment after gathering water, noticed him sitting quietly. She did not speak, simply acknowledged him with a small nod. In that silent moment, a connection formed, one based on respect, understanding, and the quiet awareness that both of them were changed by the encounter they had shared. She returned home, feeling a mix of wonder and caution, while he remained near the creek, watching the sun sink below the horizon, reflecting on the lessons the plains had offered him that day. As the stars appeared, the cowboy understood something important. Life was a series of choices, each small and seemingly insignificant, yet capable of shaping the course of one's character. He knew that the frontier could be harsh and unforgiving, but it also offered moments of clarity, opportunities to act with honor, and chances to grow beyond the limitations of past mistakes. The girl had unknowingly reminded him of the power of conscience, the importance of protecting innocence, and the weight of responsibility that came with being human. In the quiet of that evening, both the girl and the cowboy carried their thoughts into the night. She, unaware of the depth of his inner struggle, simply felt the presence of someone watching over her and her family. He, fully aware of his emotions and reflections, carried the knowledge that even one encounter, one choice, one act of respect, could begin to shape a better future for himself and, in some small way, for others. The days continued, each filled with routine and reflection, with quiet observation and subtle growth. The cowboy learned to measure his actions, to temper impulse with thought, and to consider the long-term effects of his behavior. The girl, in turn, grew more thoughtful, more aware of the world beyond her immediate life, and more confident in her ability to navigate it. Their lives, though separate, were connected by that single meeting and by the lessons they exchanged without words. And so, life on the plains continued, a delicate balance of survival, growth, and reflection. The cowboy carried his conscience as both a burden and a guide, while the girl carried her curiosity and innocence as a shield and a light. Each had been changed, each had learned, and each would carry the memory of that time forever. A reminder of the fragile, powerful, and sometimes painful beauty of human connection. The days turned into weeks, and the cowboy's life on the plains became quieter, yet his mind was restless. Each morning, he rose with the sun and continued his wandering, seeking cattle, water, and shelter. But he could not escape the thoughts that weighed heavily on him. The memory of the Komanche girl lingered, not as a single fleeting image, but as a persistent presence that followed him in every step he took. He realized that this encounter, so brief and so seemingly simple, had touched something deep within him, a conscience that he had ignored for far too long. He found himself thinking about the choices he had made throughout his life. As a young boy, he had grown up in a world where survival mattered above all else. He had learned early that life was harsh and unforgiving, that people could be cruel, and that kindness was often a luxury few could afford. Yet, in all those years, he had also seen examples of goodness, small acts that reminded him there was more to life than hardship and fear. Now, after meeting the girl, those memories returned with clarity, forcing him to confront his own behavior and the man he had become. At first, he tried to distract himself. He focused on the work of a cowboy, the cattle, the trails, the travel. He told himself that keeping busy would quiet the thoughts that haunted him. But no matter how far he walked, no matter how many miles he covered on horseback, he could not escape the feelings that had taken root. He began to notice the tiniest details in the world around him. The rustle of grass in the wind, the distant call of a bird, the reflection of sunlight on the creek. Each detail reminded him of the girl, of her innocence, and of the responsibility that now seemed inseparable from his very being. One evening, after a long day on the trail, he made camp near a small grove of trees. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the first stars began to appear. He sat by the fire, tending the embers, and allowed himself to think without interruption. Memories came to him in waves, moments from his childhood, times when he had acted selfishly or without thought, and times when he had been kind and gentle. He realized that life had always been a mixture of choices, some small and insignificant, others defining and irreversible. The cowboy began writing in his journal, something he had started only recently. He wrote about the girl, about the encounter, and about the thoughts that had plagued him ever since. Writing gave him a strange comfort, a way to confront his emotions without harming anyone or acting rashly. He recorded his guilt, his confusion, and the lessons he had learned about responsibility, respect, and the fragile nature of trust. Each word he wrote seemed to lighten the weight on his chest, though never fully. As the weeks passed, his reflection deepened. He began to notice patterns in his own behavior, how often he had allowed impulse to guide him, how frequently he had prioritized survival over morality, and how often he had ignored the feelings of others. He remembered the look in the girl's eyes, the way she had trusted him despite knowing little about him. That memory became a mirror, forcing him to face the man he had been and to question the man he wanted to become. One day, he stumbled upon another traveler along the trail, a young man no older than himself when he had first begun roaming the plains. The traveler was struggling with basic needs. His horse was tired, his provisions low, and his spirit weary. The cowboy stopped and offered assistance. He shared water, guided the young man to a safe resting spot, and spoke words of encouragement. In helping this stranger, he felt a small sense of redemption. It was not the kind of sweeping atonement that erased past mistakes, but it was a step, a choice to act with compassion rather than indifference. The cowboy's thoughts often returned to the Komanche girl. He wondered about her days, her laughter, and the simple routines of life in her encampment. He imagined her growing older, learning about the world, and carrying her own experiences into the future. He realized that he could not protect her directly, could not influence her life beyond that brief encounter. But he could ensure that his actions elsewhere were guided by conscience and care. Each choice he made, no matter how small, became a reflection of the man he wanted to be. A man shaped not only by survival, but by understanding, respect, and responsibility. At night, he would lie under the stars and contemplate the vastness of the plains. The silence was both comforting and overwhelming, a space where he could hear the quiet thoughts of his heart. He thought about the times he had faltered, the moments when he had acted selfishly, and the people he had hurt unintentionally through carelessness or indifference. He realized that guilt was not merely a punishment but a guide, a signpost pointing toward the need for growth and better choices. The cowboy began to recognize a change within himself. His eyes, once hardened by years of wandering and hardship, now saw details and patterns he had ignored before. The wind carried whispers of lessons he had learned from nature, from people he met, and from the simple presence of the girl whose trust had awakened his conscience. He began to understand that life on the plains was not only about physical survival but about moral and emotional survival. The ability to act rightly even when the world made it difficult. One day, as he was riding along a narrow trail through a canyon, he witnessed a group of children playing near a stream. They laughed, splashed water, and chased each other in pure joy. The scene reminded him of the girl, of her laughter, and of the innocence that existed despite the challenges of life. He felt a mixture of warmth and sadness, realizing that the world could be both beautiful and cruel, that moments of joy were often fragile, and that responsibility to protect and respect others was a lifelong challenge. The cowboy began to take deliberate steps to live differently. He helped travelers who struggled on the trail, offered guidance to those lost in the plains, and made small acts of kindness wherever he could. Each act was a reminder of the lessons he had learned from the girl, a way to honor the trust and innocence he had witnessed. He understood that these choices would not erase his past mistakes, but they could shape the future, not only for himself but for others who crossed his path. Despite his efforts, the memory of the girl continued to haunt him, not as a torment but as a reflection. He remembered the way she had stood with courage, her small voice asking questions, her eyes bright with curiosity and trust. He realized that even a brief encounter could leave a lasting impact, shaping the conscience of those involved and guiding them toward reflection and growth. The plains had given him many lessons, but none as powerful as the one taught by the Komanche girl. His inner struggle intensified one evening when a storm rolled across the plains. Rain poured in heavy sheets, lightning flashed across the sky, and the wind howled through the hills. He took shelter beneath a rocky overhang, watching the storm rage around him. In that moment, he felt a parallel between the storm outside and the turmoil within. The storm was uncontrollable, chaotic, and wild, yet it was also cleansing, a natural force that could reshape the land. He understood that his own inner storm, fueled by reflection, guilt, and conscience, was similarly necessary for growth. As the storm passed and the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, the cowboy felt a sense of calm. He realized that breaking through the chaos of his past required patience, self-reflection, and deliberate action. He could not undo mistakes, but he could choose to act differently moving forward. The girl had given him an example of the fragile strength of innocence and trust, and it had changed him more profoundly than he could have imagined. In the weeks that followed, he continued to travel, but with a new perspective. He observed the world with care, considered the impact of his choices, and approached each interaction with thoughtfulness. He began to see the subtle ways in which his actions affected others, realizing that even a kind word or a helpful gesture could ripple outward, creating effects beyond immediate understanding. The lessons from the plains, reinforced by the encounter with the girl, became a moral compass guiding him through the challenges of frontier life. The cowboy also began to reflect on his own character, recognizing the duality within himself, the man shaped by hardship and survival, and the man capable of compassion, reflection, and moral courage. He understood that growth required acknowledging both sides, accepting past weaknesses, and striving to act rightly in the present. The girl had not only awakened his conscience but had shown him that even in a harsh world, goodness could exist and could guide one toward better choices. Through all of this, he carried a quiet determination to live with awareness, to honor the trust of those he encountered, and to allow his conscience to shape his actions. The plains stretched endlessly before him, vast and unforgiving, yet full of opportunities to do right, to reflect, and to grow. He knew the journey would be long, that the inner struggle would continue, but he also knew that the first step toward change had been taken, and it had begun with a brief, powerful encounter with a young Komanche girl whose courage and innocence had left an indelible mark on his heart. The cowboy continued his journey across the vast plains, carrying with him the lessons he had learned from the encounter with the Komanche girl. Time moved slowly on the frontier, yet every day brought new challenges and new opportunities to act with care and thoughtfulness. He traveled along winding trails, across rivers, and through hills that stretched endlessly toward the horizon, always mindful of the choices he made and the lives he touched. As he wandered, he encountered families, travelers, and settlers, each with their own struggles and stories. He offered help wherever he could, guiding those who were lost, sharing food and water with those in need, and offering advice to travelers who were uncertain of the land. Every interaction reminded him of the trust he had witnessed in the girl, the courage she had shown, and the responsibility he now felt to act rightly. Through these small acts, he began to feel a sense of purpose that had eluded him for years. At night, he would sit by his fire under the stars, reflecting on the day. The plains stretched endlessly, a silent witness to both hardship and growth. He wrote in his journal regularly, recording thoughts, lessons, and reflections. Writing became a kind of meditation, a way to confront his feelings and measure his own progress. He reflected on the mistakes of his past, the choices he had made, and the people he had met. He understood that life was a series of interconnected moments, each with the potential to shape character and influence the future. The memory of the Komanche girl remained a guiding presence. He often thought of her laughter, her curiosity, and her courage. He imagined her growing older, learning, and living a full life, carrying with her the strength and resilience that were part of her character. Though he could not know the details of her life, he felt a connection that went beyond distance and time. Her presence in his memory served as a constant reminder of the kind of person he wanted to become, a man capable of empathy, conscience, and care. One day, while traveling through a narrow canyon, he encountered a group of children playing near a stream. Their laughter and joy reminded him of the girl and the innocence that existed even in a harsh world. He watched quietly, careful not to intrude, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for the moments of joy and light he could witness. These small moments reinforced his understanding that life was not just about survival but about nurturing goodness, protecting the vulnerable, and finding beauty in the simplest experiences. The cowboy also began to reflect on the patterns of life he had observed on the plains. He noticed how people relied on one another, how trust and kindness could spread quietly, and how small gestures often had a ripple effect. He realized that morality and conscience were not abstract ideas but practical tools for living in a world that demanded both strength and care. The girl had shown him the power of innocence and trust, and he now understood that honoring those qualities required consistent, deliberate effort. As months passed, the cowboy continued to travel, always guided by reflection and conscience. He revisited familiar trails, passed by the creek where he had first met the girl, and even caught glimpses of her distant home from afar. Though he never approached directly, he was reassured to see signs of life continuing peacefully. The smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing, and families moving with purpose. These moments of observation provided a sense of closure and a reminder that the choices he made now mattered even more because they were rooted in understanding and care. He also began to share his experiences with others, speaking quietly about the importance of conscience, respect, and thoughtfulness. Travelers and settlers who listened were often surprised by his insights, for they came from someone who had lived the rough realities of frontier life. He spoke of the lessons he had learned from observing the Komanche girl, from witnessing trust and innocence, and from reflecting on the impact of his own actions. Through these conversations, he found that teaching others, even in small ways, became another form of personal growth and redemption. During the long nights, the cowboy often thought about his own past, about the hardships he had endured, and the moments when he had failed to act rightly. He no longer carried these thoughts as guilt alone, but as guides for improvement. Each memory of failure became a lesson, each recollection of kindness a standard to uphold. He understood that the past could not be changed, but the future was shaped by every deliberate choice made in the present. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the plains glowed in warm golden light, the cowboy paused near a quiet grove of trees. He watched the wind ripple through the grass, and the distant hills appeared calm and inviting. He thought about the girl and the many lessons she had unknowingly taught him. Her courage, her trust, and her simple, innocent perspective had reshaped the way he viewed the world. He realized that people, no matter their age or background, had the power to influence others profoundly through small, genuine acts. The cowboy reflected on the idea of legacy, the impact one leaves on the world, through actions, kindness, and conscience. He understood that his encounter with the girl was a turning point, a moment that had defined not just how he acted, but who he aspired to be. He resolved that his future actions would be guided by the principles he had learned: respect, responsibility, empathy, and careful consideration of others. In doing so, he hoped to honor the trust and innocence that had so deeply affected him. He continued to travel through the seasons, experiencing the changing beauty of the plains, the warmth of summer, the golden hues of autumn, the crisp chill of winter, and the renewal of spring. Each season brought new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities to act with thoughtfulness. The cowboy began to notice the subtle signs of life, the ways in which people adapted, and the resilience of communities living in a harsh but beautiful landscape. His awareness of these patterns deepened his understanding of responsibility and the delicate balance of life. Over time, he came to understand that his journey was not only physical but deeply internal. The vastness of the plains mirrored the depth of his own reflection, and the encounters he had, whether brief or extended, shaped his character. He realized that moral growth was a lifelong endeavor, requiring constant mindfulness, reflection, and deliberate action. The Komanche girl had provided the catalyst for this journey, but it was his own willingness to learn and act that allowed him to transform. The cowboy also noticed how others began to respond differently to him. Travelers and settlers recognized a sense of calm, thoughtfulness, and reliability in his presence. They sought his guidance, trusted his judgment, and respected his actions. This respect was not something he sought for personal gain, but a reflection of the consistent effort he made to live rightly. In many ways, the world began to mirror the growth he had experienced internally. In his solitude, he often imagined the girl's future. He pictured her learning about the wider world, gaining knowledge, and continuing to live with courage and wisdom. Though he could not influence her life directly, he took comfort in the knowledge that the encounter had left an imprint on him, one that ensured he would act with care and thoughtfulness toward others. He hoped, in a quiet way, that the example he set might also ripple outward, affecting those he met in small but meaningful ways. Years passed, and the cowboy became known as a man of integrity and reflection. His past, though filled with hardship and mistakes, had become the foundation for growth. He carried his experiences, his reflections, and the lessons from the plains wherever he went. The Komanche girl remained a symbol of innocence, courage, and the profound impact one encounter can have on a life. She had awakened a conscience that might have remained dormant, and through that awakening, he had discovered the power of responsibility, empathy, and moral courage. As the sun set one evening over the rolling plains, the cowboy paused on a hilltop, looking out across the horizon. He reflected on the long journey, the challenges he had faced, and the lessons he had learned. He understood that life would continue to present choices, that the plains would remain both beautiful and demanding, and that his growth was ongoing. Yet he also felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had embraced the lessons taught by trust, innocence, and conscience. The cowboy knew that he could never fully repay the impact the girl had on his life, but he could honor it through the way he lived. Every kind gesture, every thoughtful action, and every moment of reflection became part of a larger tapestry of moral growth. He had learned that one encounter, one moment of shared humanity, could shape the course of a life in profound and lasting ways. And so, he continued his journey, walking the plains with a renewed sense of purpose and understanding. The lessons of the past guided his present, and the promise of future choices gave him hope. He understood that life was not only about survival or hardship, but about the ability to act with integrity, to reflect on one's actions, and to honor the trust and innocence of others. The plains, wide and endless, became a living classroom, teaching lessons of morality, responsibility, and the quiet power of human connection. In the distance, The creek where the Komanche girl lived shimmered in the sunlight. Though he never returned directly, he carried her presence in his heart, a reminder of the fragile strength of trust and the transformative power of conscience. Through this encounter, the cowboy had discovered not only the depth of human responsibility, but also the enduring beauty of choices guided by empathy and reflection. The story of their meeting became a quiet but powerful legacy, a testament to the ability of a single moment to change a life forever. And in that understanding, he found peace knowing that while the past could not be changed, the future was shaped by deliberate, thoughtful, and compassionate action. The plains stretched endlessly before him, and he walked forward with hope, awareness, and a heart forever marked by the lessons of one courageous, trusting girl.